fleet of more than 4,000 ships put out from England. This was D-Day.
Hi everyone, I'm Dana Lewis, and this is Backstory. 76 years ago, June 6, 1944, the Allies began to take back Europe from Nazi Germany by risking everything, crossing the English Channel to take the beaches of Normandy from a dug-in and well-prepared enemy.
Barges approached shore ready for instant action, some bearing artillery and rocket guns already opening fire. The armies of the United Nations have made their first landings on the soil of Western Europe. Another of the great decisive battles of world history has been joined. This is D-Day.
The target, a 50-mile stretch of the Normandy coastline divided into 5 sectors: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. 156,000 American and British and Canadian soldiers fought through a hail of bullets to begin the march to Berlin. I've been to Normandy for D-Day celebrations and commemorations. There are grim reminders, those sprawling, well-kept grave sites of soldiers who died fighting German forces. But to be there on D-Day is also a remarkable party, because every year the French dress up in Allied uniforms like the 101st Airborne and 82nd Airborne and raise a toast, or 10, to liberation, to say thank you. This year, in the middle of a pandemic, those veterans still alive can't go back and pay their respects. A very different D-Day. So we talked to one Canadian veteran of that brutal fight on Juno Beach 76 years ago. All right, joining me now is Jim Parks, who was a 95-year-old veteran, and he was a member of the Canadian Royal Winnipeg Rifles who landed on D-Day, and he joins me now from very close to Toronto, Canada. And in Montreal, meet David O'Keefe, who is a Canadian war historian, the author of One Day in August, and his latest book, 7 Days in Hell. Very detailed, extremely well reviewed. You got to read it. Jim, if I can start with you, how are you? First of all, it's been a very tough few months for everybody because of COVID-19.
I'm doing pretty good. It's we're out and away from Toronto area, so yeah.
You know, some people, Jim, have compared this pandemic to war. It surely doesn't compare to what you've been through 76 years ago.
When you look back at it, it's a really unique time. You don't forget a lot of the incidents that happened.
You've been to Normandy. You've been to Normandy.
Oh, I've been about 4 or 5. I was there last year. Yeah.
This may be one of the most quiet D-Day anniversaries ever, because most people cannot travel and they can't get there. I guess that's kind of a sad thing when you're trying to keep this in everybody's memory, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's very easy for me to find a place where we landed because the river is right there, the Sewells River. And we're a B company landed just adjacent to it, and I was attached to B company going in. So it's when I go down to the beach, and I said, well, there's the Juno Beach Center, and it's right in front of the Winnipeg Rifles B company beach.
Will you lead me through that day and what you heard, what you saw that morning?
Well, actually, I was we were on a landing craft tank. We had a mortar. We had our 3-inch mortars. And we were supposed to go in, but because they had armored bulldozers on the LCT, and they had big grappling hooks and 2 sappers with each of these bulldozers. And they were to drop off first, and they were to drag these obstacles out of the water to allow the landing craft itself to come in. But however, the boat itself that we're on got the left front, it hit something pretty badly, an explosion. And there was a sailor there, he was supposed to wind down the ramp. And he had a difficult time because he was pretty well shot up, and so somebody had to help him. And we got down, and the first bulldozer, they got off okay. And our first mortar carrier got off, but the water was too deep and it sunk. And our sergeant said, we can't go in there because you have to get in closer to shore. But they said, no, you have to get off now. So they dropped us off, and of course we sank too. And so we had to just swim our way in. But knowing ahead of time that we were going to go under the water, I made sure I didn't have my equipment on, and the rest of we said, dump your equipment off. And the driver, as soon as he got off the ramp, he jumped up onto the top of the carrier, and he went down with us, and we all had to swim into shore. So it was
David, will you set the scene a little bit that day? I mean, there's 14,000 Canadians landing. I've talked to American soldiers who landed that day, and a lot of them tell similar stories to Jim, that they were off these carriers way before the beach, some of them carrying 100-pound packs. A lot of them, I mean, many of them drowned. The idea that you just got off that with all your gear and mortars and swam to shore, Jim makes it sound easy. It wasn't.
Yeah, no, it's anything but easy. And I think that's probably Jim's modesty all these years later still coming through. And that's very typical of a lot of the veterans from that time. They'll tell you about that, and they'll tend to downplay what it was that they went through. But without a doubt, I mean, what the Canadians experienced at Juno Beach in many ways is quite similar to what the Americans experienced at Omaha. Even though they didn't have to go up the sharp bluffs, the fire was incredibly intense. And of course, you know, amphibious operations, and this was the largest one ever attempted, are fraught with, you know, the possibility of disaster and glitches. And of course, what Jim is experiencing is exactly, or what he experienced was exactly what a lot of people experience. That once, you know, the plan is made, as soon as first contact is made, everything goes out the window, and you're living by your wits and you're living by your training. And so as a result, there was a lot of rough weather that day. Timings didn't go according to plan. So really, it all came down to men like Jim, you know, who had to basically think their way and fight their way on shore, particularly in horrific situations like this.
Horrific indeed. Jim, you know, some of the veterans, and maybe you can reinforce this for me, told me that when they were briefed on what they would expect when they got to the beach, they were told that, you know, the Allies had carried out their bombing and they had softened up the German positions. And when they got there, it was anything but that.
That's true, because we were told about the American bombers, the U.S. Air Force bombers would be bombing the strip of beach where all the casements were and pillboxes, and the shelling would blast it pretty badly. But as far as I know, that they were still pretty solid when we went in, and there's still a lot of mortar fire, and a lot of being on the sand. I know we had a few mortar bombs land near us, but because of the sand, it helped smother the explosions. Yeah, because it was mostly mortar bombs. We didn't get the 88s because they'd be the airburst.
Can you describe the smell, the sound, what you saw? I mean, the mayhem on that beach?
Well, mainly, I swallowed a lot of water, and my main thing I was worried about drowning with, you know, was sort of flailing away, and I got my way to shore, and we're mixed up with B Company. Somebody at one LCA passed me by on my left shoulder, and the wake, and it forced me under the water on the way in, and I finally got in, and I plopped down beside us. One of the riflemen was there. It turned out to be the guy I know, and I know his name was Corporal Scaife, somebody from Saskatchewan. And I remember this Tuesday. I always think about Corporal Scaife. Whenever I talk about the landing, I always talk about when I hit the beach, I plop down for protection. I think, well, he's plopping down. I better plop down too. But he was actually mortally wounded. So while I was there, I took he had a Sten gun. I took a Sten gun and I rolled him over and undid a small pack. And because I lost all my stuff, our mortar carrier went under the water, so we lost everything. So I had a small pack and I had a Sten gun. So that's what I had. A lot of commotion going on, and we knew that our platoon commander would be shortly supposed to land about 2 minutes behind us. Sure enough, he landed where he's supposed to land, right where we were. So I ended up going inland with him. But past the beach, there was, except for sniper fire, there wasn't much happening. It was sort of quiet, you know what I mean? There wasn't any, we weren't getting shelled or nothing. And we ended up going to a small village about 7 or 8 miles inland, a place called Puteaux. And it was quiet the first night, then the Germans put their counterattack in the next day. But just prior to the attack, I was sent along with a corporal from Charlie Company, and the RSM, Mickey Austin, I was seconded to the battalion headquarters because I wasn't with a mortar crew, and we had no mortars. And he sent us out. He says he told us to quieten down that bush. In other words, go over there and spray it. So we went over and sprayed it with our Sten guns just to quieten it down. And we ended up back, and meanwhile we were getting. This is on June the 8th. Not the day we were overrun by the SS, the 12th SS.
What Jim is referring to is perhaps one of the greatest feats of bravery and courage by any Canadians at any time in the history of warfare. Again, his modesty is showing. One of the things we tend to look at Normandy and we think about June 6th. We get on shore June 6th and somehow the war is over. Well, that's not necessarily how it went. As a matter of fact, the Allies knew quite well that the Germans would attempt to throw them back into the sea. So what Jim is referencing now was a hold or a defensive perimeter that the Canadians threw up very quickly along an area they just called the Oak Line. And basically they hung on against savage counterattacks by the 12th SS, the Hitler Youth Panzer Division, who were, well, I'm sure as Jim can tell you, they were ruthless and they were fanatical. But at the end of the day, his unit and the rest of 7th Brigade were able to hold on and provided one of the greatest victories and most pivotal victories in all of the Normandy landings.
It's an incredible story. And I think, David, so many people don't realize that, Normandy and D-Day was the tip of the spear. It was the first few steps, but just that battle through Normandy, what went on almost 3 months.
Yeah, it did. It stretched on for another 90 days. And the fighting in Normandy, and I'm sure Jim can attest to this, was something that would have rivaled anything that you would have seen on the Western Front in World War I. You have attritional battles. Success was measured for a time in feet and yards, not miles. It was a bloody, bloody campaign that took a massive toll, particularly on Canadian infantry. And, Jim, as far as I know, was able to make it through Normandy relatively unscathed, if I'm not mistaken, Jim.
I got through Normandy. I got buried in a slit trench in Carper Cay. I got blown through a door, running for cover also. And I got my foot through a window and a shell landed right behind me and blew me through the window. It was touch and go there all the time. And our first look at the German soldiers, we ran a 12th SS. They were well equipped, and they were if you think about, they're fully camouflaged. They had the steel helmet on, and they had the binded twine in squares hanging down in front of the face to break the outline of their face, and their face was camouflaged. And I had a very close look at, because when I told to go through this bush, and we with the Corporal from C Company, we heard this talking, and we thought it was some of our own troops, and we suddenly realized it wasn't our own troops. It was 5 of the 12th SS. So we just kept quiet until they went by, because there was 5 against 2, and they had better weapons. They had their Schneiders and all of them. After about 2 minutes, we went out and followed along where they were.
A lot of people, David, know that Utah and Omaha, they've heard those stories. What did the Canadians face on Juno? Was the German defenses were complete all along the Normandy beach? They faced as bad as any of the troops did on landing day.
Yeah, generally speaking, most of the way that the Atlantic Wall was constructed was a series of strong points. And the strong points were erected at areas that were obvious for landing. And of course, there's only certain types of terrain that you can actually land in. So this was one of the things that the Canadians had to face. And as I mentioned before, with the exception of the escarpment, it was essentially the same type of defense that the Canadians met that the Americans did at Omaha Beach. So you're talking about, pillboxes and concentric fields of fire, all with forward observation officers up front to call in heavy artillery, to call in mortars, as was mentioning. And then, of course, way in the background, getting ready to launch their counterattacks, are the mobile panzer divisions that are going to allow the Allies a little bit of a footing, and then they're going to slam right into them. That was their idea, and push them back into the sea. So, you are experiencing, or Jim certainly experienced, some of the toughest fighting that you would have in the Second World War on any battlefield. just in those opening 48 hours of Normandy.
Jim, how do you reflect back today with all of it's a crazy world right now, and there's a lot of division. How do you reflect back? I mean, lessons learned all these years later. Should we be a little more united right now?
Well, yeah, it's what you call stormy seas going now, and we're just hoping that the old saying was after stormy seas come calm water. So I'm trying to look ahead.
One of my old television colleagues told me that, described you guys as the greatest generation. And there's a series of books now that have been written along that line. None of them as good as David's, but there's a number of books that have written on the greatest generation. Do you think this generation has got to wake up and learn something from maybe the true grit of yours?
What I've been doing, I go around and I talk to groups and schools. It helps put my point across. And when it's all over, we're hanging around we have to get chased out of the school because we're hanging around and they want their questions so much. They're very much interested in what's going on. And I do the best I can. And I try to make it, I try to include names of people that are no longer with us. Like I talk about Corporal Scape on the beach that was killed on the beach. Corporal Martin, he dragged him out of the water and he was mortally wounded. And he died in my brother's arms right next to me. And I try to keep mentioning these names, to people who are longer with us. Another chap that went to school with me on June the 8th, a guy called Billy Hood. He was captured. He was one of the group of 56 who were murdered by the SS just on June the 8th. It was a real tough go because we not only lost quite a few people on the beach. Our unit lost about 160 on the beach, roughly. The night of the 7th and on the 8th, all the reinforcements come in and they spread them around the trench. And we had only 2 in a trench, and they popped another guy in the trench with us and made it too crowded. So we hastily got out of the trench and helped them dig more trenches because it's you try to get 3 men in a trench that's 6 feet wide, and there's not. You try to make it deep enough to keep it with a parapet to keep you safe from any shrapnel or any machine gun fire.
I think some of David O'Keefe's writing by the reviews is so incredibly detailed. Some of the veterans have talked about having trouble getting through those pages because it really does take you back to some of the trenches and the artillery fire, which was so intense as you made your way through France.
Well, the artillery fire was bad enough. Like I say, I got blown through the window, and we had our trench. The shell landed right on the parapet, and it blew all the earth in on top of us, and you lost your hearing a bit. I had mine. I got back to the RAP about 2 days later because I still couldn't hear that well. And they said, well, it'll keep coming back. So mostly it did come back.
David, if I can just put it over to you to kind of wrap this up. I mean, I'd been to Normandy, and I know both of you have, and it is not a sad celebration in total, because it was also, D-Day was about liberation, and the French celebrate that. There's a very big party that goes on behind some of these very dignified ceremonies, and it makes me sad that this year most people will not be able to go to Normandy and observe any of these remembrance days because of COVID-19. I mean, it's a tough one.
Yeah, it is. And I think, thank God we have the kind of technology that we do today. I mean, look what we're doing. And I've been contacted by a lot of people who are in the area, local tour guides, and they're planning to do a lot of virtual tours. So literally, instead of having a few hundred people tune in, you can have the entire world tune in now. So at first, although you would think it would be very solemn and lonely, you can realize that there'll be potentially millions of people tuning in on June 6th and for the other anniversaries coming up, which I think is absolutely remarkable that we're able to do something like this, given everything that's unfolding in the world right now.
All right, Jim Parks, a member of the Canadian Royal Winnipeg Rifles who landed on D-Day. It's an honor to talk to you, sir. Thank you very much. And David O'Keefe, you're a great historian, and the 2 books, again, One Day in August, and his latest book, 7 Days in Hell, sounds like a great read. Thank you so much, both of you.
That 7 Days in Hell book, if you want to find out what it's like, just read that book. I almost felt he must have been in a trench with me sometimes.
So thank you both again.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And that's Backstory for D-Day 2020. I'm Dana Lewis. We honor the brave who fought for our freedoms And at a time of so much division, surely it's a reminder of what bonds us together. Freedom against tyranny. Reject the haters. Please share our podcast and sign up for more episodes wherever you listen to Backstory.